Of Keir Starmer's attacks on freedom of speech?
It's exactly what you'd expect from someone who holds his position. It's nothing new. I think in the UK, things have gone farther in the UK on the, what would you say, with regards to threats to freedom of expression than maybe anywhere in the West, although Canada's doing its best to play catch-up, maybe New Zealand. It's in keeping with his ethos. It's not surprising, and it's a...
Keir Starmer thought he was just stepping into a polite debate, but then Jordan Peterson turned up like a flamethrower, made of logic, coffee, and a giant dictionary. In minutes, Starmer looked like a glitching Siri trying to explain socialism. This wasn't politics. It was a TED Talk smashing head-on into the WWE. And guess what? Someone brought a steel chair. Ever wondered what it looks like when a philosopher tears a politician's world apart? You're about to see. Somewhere in the haze of Downing Street, Keir Starmer is struggling to lead. Charisma? About the same as a fax machine. Conviction? Lukewarm tea at best. Enter Jordan Peterson. Not in person, more like a philosophical thunderstorm, a walking library with teeth. Every fragile bit of Starmer's leadership gets ripped apart. It's like watching a masterclass in self-sabotage.
Surprise you that Keir Starmer doesn't want a national inquiry into grooming gangs?
No, that doesn't surprise me. It's exactly what you'd expect. I've got an article coming out in the Telegraph this week about exactly that issue, and so it's appalling. Well, there's hard questions that need to be asked about and answered about multiculturalism, and no one's willing to have the discussion, but it needs to be had, obviously. And I think there's maybe a way forward with regards to the signatories of the Abraham Accord, to have a serious discussion about how Islamic fundamentalism might be brought under control, and some vision of how...
Picture Britain as a ship tossed around in stormy seas, the crew totally panicking, the compass spinning like mad, and at the helm, Keir Starmer, squinting at a manual called Generic Leadership for Dummies, desperately trying to move forward without upsetting a single soul. Meanwhile, from the calm, safe shores of reason, Jordan Peterson is yelling across the waves, asking the obvious question, has anyone on board actually read a map?
The state of morality in Britain that grooming gangs were taking place for more than 3 decades.
No, that's what happens when a naive, demented, and self-righteous multiculturalism takes the upper hand, and when the upper class is willing to sacrifice the poor to their own moral presumptions. Yeah, it's appalling in every possible way. So, and it indicates, it's indicative of something truly hideous beneath the surface, not only on the rape gang side, but obviously on the side of the authorities that conspired to keep it a secret. Dreadful.
Keir Starmer's identity crisis? It's not a phase, it's a full-on lifestyle. One minute, he's the people's progressive knight in shining armour. Next minute, he's buffing up his centrist credentials like some dusty old briefcase. He flips positions so fast, you'd think he's doing interpretive dance, not running a country. And no, this isn't clever adaptability, it's straight up ideological whiplash.
Prediction for the UK election. You've been quite scathing about Sir Keir Starmer, but the polls show at the moment, certainly, if the election happens in the autumn, it seems likely, that he is heading to some kind of victory. What do you think that would mean for Britain? And do the Conservatives have any chance of stopping that?
I think it'll be catastrophic. I believe that Labour, like the socialist parties in Canada, is absolutely overwhelmed by the diversity, equity, and inclusivity, victimizer narrative types.
Jordan Peterson, the guy who boils human behaviour down to 12 rules and demands accountability from goldfish, would look at Keir Starmer's political acrobatics and call it a masterclass in existential avoidance. If clarity were money, Starmer would be completely bankrupt. His policies, like Schrödinger's cat, they exist and don't exist, all depending on who's watching. On the economy, Starmer rolls out budgets that feel less like vision, more like a spreadsheet come to life. Growth is promised, but under the hood, nothing. Just vibes, wishful thinking, and tax tweaks that pinch the middle class while giving billionaires a friendly pat on the back. It's the political equivalent of shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic and insisting it's just a bit of ice. Meanwhile, Peterson's take on competence and structured ambition rips through Starmer's obsession with surface-level stability. Starmer runs the country like a dental clinic. Sterile, procedural, passion-free. No principle, no fire. Under him, the economy doesn't feel like a bold new era. It's a museum of broken calculators and recycled slogans.
Even if Starmer himself has any sense, which I doubt, the probability that his minions will lay waste to the UK it's certain in my estimation. There's so much behind the scene tyrannizing going on in the name of hypothetical utopian progress that it's almost unimaginable. I mean, the CCTVs in the ULEZ zones are a great example of that, and everything that's happened in London under Sadiq Khan, who's like poster boy for ideologically addled globalist utopians. And if the Labour gets in, and I can understand why the citizens of the UK are hungry for a change, if Labour gets in, it's like Venezuela, here we come.
When it comes to culture, Keir Starmer is terrified of upsetting anyone. He's turned Labour into political gluten-free tofu, bland, textureless, unable to hold a shape without constantly apologising. He avoids cultural debates like they're radioactive. Fair enough, but ignoring them isn't a strategy unless his goal is to bore voters into submission. Jordan Peterson, on the other hand, pushes clarity, conviction, and a proper moral framework. Starmer seems to think if he whispers loud enough, no one will notice his party's moral compass got left in a pub near Camden. You can almost hear him mutter, "If I just don't look reality in the eye, maybe it won't ask me any hard questions." Then there's the authoritarian streak. Once hailed as the saviour of party democracy, Starmer now runs Labour like a private club for risk-averse technocrats. Candidate selection, all the grassroots involvement of a North Korean election. Any ideological dissent, exile, quick and clean. The left wing of the party, erased like a Soviet-era family photo.
Starmer's posturing with regards to adolescence is only going to make that worse. It's bad psychology, and it's not only that, it's also oriented not to help young people, but to make Mr. Starmer feel a hell of a lot more secure in the idiot presumptions of his dimwit progressivism. So, and that's really the fundamental aim. It's like, how can we show we're right? And if we have to burn some young people on the pyre to make sure that our moral presuppositions can remain intact and our faith in our idiocy remains unchallenged, then we might as well teach kids using a Netflix series on.
Now compare that with Jordan Peterson's respect for institutions and decentralised power. Starmer isn't leading a movement, he's managing a brand. A bland, lifeless corporate brand, loyalty cards included, mandatory PowerPoint slides too. For him, leadership isn't vision, it's control, understuds. On foreign policy, he doesn't lead, he follows. International summits turn into cosplay. He plays the global statesman, reading off whatever memo the latest Western ally sent him. His stance on the world, not values. Optics, diplomacy, press releases, strategy, hashtags. Britain under Starmer isn't being led, it's being managed by a middle manager with delusions of adequacy. Peterson, preaching responsibility and purpose, would call Starmer a textbook case of ambition without philosophy, a leader with no spine, chasing public approval like a golden retriever chasing tennis balls. Even where clarity should be obvious, housing, education, climate, Starmer buries the simple underlayers of complexity. Housing reforms, swamped in red tape. Education plans, sunk under metrics. Climate pledges, worded so carefully they don't upset oil donors or suburban car owners. It's policy by risk assessment.
Your desire to tar anyone who has, as I say, not got a voice and is wanting to make their voice heard as a violent far-right neo-Nazi seems to me to be a big error by Keir Starmer and others. Because, if you can't say, we recognize your deep, deep concerns about some things that have happened, including mass stabbings, terrorism, and much more. We understand your deep, deep concerns, and we are going to try to get onto this and on top of this. But there is no excuse to turn out on the streets and be violent against your Muslim brothers and sisters and neighbors.
Keir Starmer has turned governance into flavourless porridge, non-committal strategies, no bite, no soul, just bullet points dressed up as beliefs. Britain doesn't need a chief manager, it needs a leader with a backbone, a plan, and ideally, a pulse. Jordan Peterson didn't just tear Starmer apart intellectually. He ripped away the illusion that anything solid ever existed beneath the pressed suit and rehearsed pauses. The real tragedy? This all happens while Britain is drowning in crises, a health system gasping for air, a housing market playing Monopoly on steroids, a generation of young people inheriting nothing but anxiety. Through it all, Starmer delivers statements with the force of a dial tone, impact like a damp sponge. Peterson wouldn't even need to raise his voice. Starmer defeats himself by being the political equivalent of a ghost-written self-help book, full of generalities, terrified of specifics, destined to gather dust. Britain deserves more than a political placebo. It needs leadership that sparks action, not one that merely manages decline. What Peterson dismantles with philosophy, Britain is forced to endure in reality. Leadership reduced to focused, tested slogans. Belief dissolved into administrative neatness. Starmer is what happens when a nation in crisis hires a risk consultant instead of a prime minister.
Somehow navigate us to a better place. Possibly. Is he going to be a transformative prime minister where we all wake up in 2-3 years and think, wow, the Starmer revolution? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's
I hope he
better.
does.
That's better than it might have been. Well, I spent quite a long time working with Democrats in the U.S. and I got very disillusioned about that, partly because they showed zero propensity to draw a line between the moderate Democrats and the radical.
And then the Peterson-shaped intellectual meteor finally hit number 10. Wallpaper splattered with cold, hard philosophical reality. No shouting, no frothing, just calmly slicing through Starmer's leadership like a science fair frog. Except this frog has a law degree, a corner office, and zero spine. Peterson didn't need to raise his voice. All he needed was a mirror. Let's break it down. Peterson's worldview, radical idea, leaders take responsibility for their actions. Starmer, meanwhile, treats responsibility like it's radioactive. Problems arise, strikes, NH backlogs, economic stumbles. He disappears behind inquiries, reviews, and learning lessons, like a magician fleeing from his own rabbit. Peterson's creed, fix your life before you run a country. Starmer's creed, treat the country like a group project and hope someone else takes the blame when the PowerPoint crashes. And vision? Quality leaders have it. A purpose, a blueprint for the future. Starmer manages a party and a country with all the visionary spark of a printer setup manual.
I suspect what will happen in the UK is the same thing that happened in Canada, which is that the right will split, reform, and reunite, and that would be the best bet. Maybe as a coalition government, I'm not staking my, what would you say? I'm not... No, not on either candidate. I've spoken with Nigel Farage and with Kemi Badenoch, and they're both credible people, and they have to fight it out amongst themselves. But I imagine the right will unite eventually again, and hopefully...
While Jordan Peterson talks structure, order, and moral clarity, Keir Starmer seems convinced that vague optimism and management jargon can replace philosophy. One man uses dragons to explain chaos. The other dodges questions about rail strikes like they actually were dragons. Peterson, love him or hate him, builds coherence. Clean your room, clean your country, put your house in order before lecturing the world. Now look at Starmer's house. Not just messy, it's condemned. Half the policies are boarded up, the roof leaks contradictions, and there's a stench of focus group leftovers wafting from the kitchen. If Peterson's ideology is a cathedral of order, Starmer's is a flat-packed cabinet from B&Q, held together with fear and duct tape. Starmer isn't just a weak leader, he's the anti-leader. He's what you get when you send a spreadsheet to finishing school and teach it to frown at press conferences. Where's the fire? Where's the conviction? Where's the unapologetic, here's who I am? Instead, he speaks in press releases, campaigns in riddles, governs like he's terrified of a bad Trustpilot review. Peterson would call it moral cowardice, an unwillingness to plant your flag on the cultural and political battlefield because you're scared of upsetting the BBC, the donors, or worse.